So a recent question that came up was how to do non-spherical eyeballs that rotate and move around inside the eye with deformations. So the way I usually go about doing this is I have the modeler model in the eyes that they want, and then what we do is we create a secondary set of eyes that are good for rigging but not necessarily good for displaying. So I'm going to open those up right now. And what I've done is I have these two eyeballs here. And if I turn off the lattices that are on them right now, you see that they are just round spherical eyes. The reason I do this is because to make that rotation work, it's much easier to have it be spherical and then let the lattice do the deformation to put it into that new shape. So using the lattice, I then made it match to the shape of the eyeball that was created. Now this is an exact, I don't really care that much as long as it's really close. And in doing this, it reminded me of something that we talked about at Blue Sky, which was model plus rig equals character. And to me, maybe I'm wrong about this, but what that meant was that, you don't show the client a T-pose version of your character with, straight hair, straight tail. You pose the character. You put him into a dynamic position so that he's more appealing. And sometimes you rig things or model things in certain ways so that the riggers can pick that up and then apply it into the rig. So this is a case that I would definitely say that that's what's happening. So when it comes down to what gets pushed on for geometry, it's going to be these better eyes. I have little pupils in there and stuff like that. It's not very complicated. But I am going to maintain that history on the lattice so that I can go in here and rotate this around. Now, one of the things you see right off the bat is that when I move this around, I'm getting some really weird, bad deformations. Basically, all that's happening is that it's falling outside the lattice region. So if I look at the lattice base here, it's just too close to the sphere original position. So if I look at the original sphere, and then I look at the lattice base, you see how it's right on the edge there. So basically what that means is that as soon as I rotate that, something like that, it's coming out of that lattice base, and that's what that popping is that you're seeing. So there's two ways you can handle that, and I should have done the first way, but I'm going to show you the second way. So let me just first duplicate this eye and move it over, and I'll show you the first way that I usually tackle that, which is to scale my lattice and the lattice base. So I'm going to select the lattice and the lattice base here, and if I just scale those up just a little bit, that usually takes care of any unwarranted times that my geometry is going to fall outside that realm. And I try and keep this very simple. Lattice, the simpler the better. If I make it too complex, I might end up with some weird shapes and things like that in there. Sometimes you may want to, pump up. Sometimes you may want to pump up your local influence to get a softer look to the deformation you have. But that's just something to be aware of. So let me delete that because we don't need it. Okay, so if I was to publish this onto a character TD, or to myself in this case, I'm going to keep the lattice history on and pass that along. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and save this and pass it on to a rig file, and I'll show you how to rig it. Okay, so now I've referenced in my geometry. You don't always have to reference in geometry for modeling to rigging. I tend to do it that way. I like to have the modularity so that when I'm in rigging, I can change things and update things, and the modeler can update and change things. It gets you out of a linear fashion and more that you can do a little more parallel work at the same time. Also, sometimes gives you the ability to rebuild things. Now, generally down the road, I will script all of this, and so it doesn't matter if I reference it or import or whatever. I'll run a script and build everything from that. But in this case, I'm going to show you how to do the eye here. So what I'm going to do is take this eye, and we'll focus on the one on the left here first. And I'm going to put a joint in the center and a joint at the front of the eyeball. So the way I want to do that, I want to get that dead center that I have here. So I'm going to actually just go to Display, Transform Display, and turn on Selection Handles. I actually have a addition to my marking menu, so I can do that automatically. I like getting that right in there. And then to get this center one, what I'm going to do is select the edge loop here. And actually, just to keep things a little bit cleaner, I'm going to duplicate this and hide the original. There we go. So this is my duplicated eye. And because I don't want any extra history by accident on there, I'm going to do it on a duplicate. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to hit a cluster. Cool. Now I'll hide my geometry. So here you can see that I have that pivot marked for the center and a pivot marked for the pupil using the cluster. So I'm going to go to my joint tool, hold down V for snapping, and snap myself some joints down here. And I always show the local rotation axes on my joints. To do that, you're going to go to Display. Actually, I have no idea. I never do it. Display, Transform Display, Local Rotation Axis. Again, I have it as a marking menu that I use all the time. Oops. Oh, so there we go. And the first one was Select HI, which is Selection Hierarchy, just so I get the both joints in the hierarchy. And I'm going to use Comment Rename to rename these guys. It's one of my favorites. I've used it since basically the very first version of Maya. And I always do L underscore, and let's do I aim, and then underscore. And so what that's going to give me is L underscore I aim underscore 0102. And then I'll suffix that with underscore joint, like that. Next thing I want to do is mirror that. So I mirror it before I do any deformations. I always do all my skeleton layouts and mirrors to make sure things are working the way I want them to. So under skeleton, mirror joints, like that. YZ is good. L to R. Yep. There we go. Now in this case, I don't want X to be pointed the wrong way like it is right now. I want it to be pointed down the joint chain. Now, normally I would just do it on orientation rather than behavioral, but I'll show you how to change that local rotation axis because I feel like that's very important. So I'm going to go and hit F8 to go into my component mode, and I'm going to hit this question mark up here. And what the question mark gives you is the access to the local rotation axis, or lets you select the local rotation axis. So now if I draw a marquee select over that, I'm going to get that rotation. And I'm going to hit E for rotate. I'm going to hold down J for snapping. And I'm just going to snap it right along until I get 180 degrees from where I was before. Now the reason I hold down the snapping is because if you don't, you could potentially get it off axis. And now if you watch when I rotate, oops, I got to get out of component mode. When I rotate in my x-axis, I get something really dumb. Really wrong, I should say. So don't do that. So now the next thing I want to do is you notice that my transforms here aren't matching my local rotation axis. If I look at the joint chain, what you can see is in my rotate axis I have a 180 here, and that's basically what I had just done. But I want to bake that into my joint. So the way that I do this is actually if I go to, again, it's a script, but it's a very easy script. It's joint-E-ZSO. So that just sets the local rotation axis and the transform axis to match each other. So now you can see that they both match each other, right? Cool. Now the next thing I want to do is get the end ones to match as well. Now this is more of an aesthetic thing, but I tend to like to have them all line up the same way. So normally I would go to skeleton, orient joints. This is in 2024, just so you know. Otherwise this wouldn't normally work. And I hit none. Unfortunately, it's not doing what I want it to. It's actually doing nothing. I don't think orient to world is what I want because I believe, I don't know what it's doing. So again, I'm going to go back to my old faithful scripts that I do trust. It's just joint-E-OJ none, which you would think would be the exact same thing that, setting that to none. unless I don't have the access to it anymore. Maybe I don't have the ability to do that anymore. Anyway, I like none because then it's going to match to its parent. So it's kind of the same thing as world, and I'm not really sure. So what I'm going to do is select the geo, select that cluster. This is the duplicates that I made before. I'm just going to delete those. I don't need those. And everything here looks the way like I want it. I'm going to unisolate this, bring back my geo. Actually, let's hide my God node because I don't need that. Bring back the original eye. Cool. So now what I want to do is bind this. I'm going to get rid of that, locate that handle again. I'm going to select the end joint and the aim joint. Select my geo, skin, bind skin. Don't worry about it going back to a low res there. And I'm going to, so that does what I think it should do. If I go to my geometry here and turn on the lattice, now what you'll notice is you're not getting what you want it to be, right? So what's happening is it's a deformation order. So if I select the skin, you see I say FFD1 and then skin cluster. So what that means is first deform it with the lattice, second deform it with the joint. So the way we change that is we go to inputs, all inputs, just by right clicking, or you can also go up here, where is it? Yeah, you have these little buttons up here on your status line, and you can click on there and say all inputs, and then you can reorder them. But before I do, there's a little bit of a bug in 2024 that I just discovered. I'm not sure why this is happening. But first what I'm going to do is turn this off. And then I'll explain the bug too after I do this. But what I'm going to do is paint skin weights on here. So often what I'll do is I'll use this second joint to scale the pupil and use the other one to do the aiming. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate these guys. Whoops. Why can't I select that joint? There we go. I'm going to isolate these guys and then paint skin weights. So we would just right click, paint skin weights. We do that again. Paint skin weight tool opens that up. So we have the eye aim, which is the pupil, and then we have the main root joint there. So first what I'm going to do is do an add and just flood the whole thing with the main joint. And then I'm going to go in here and select these verts here, and go back to my paint tool and then flood that. And then smooth it. Okay, and let's just make sure. Sorry, I had a phone call there. So, where was I? Yeah, so I'm painting. So now that I've done that, I just want to check this joint, make sure it's set to 1. Cool. So now what I should be able to do is if I scale that, I can scale the pupil. And again, it's just cartoony, so it doesn't really matter. I can also give it some other shapes and stuff like that. Cool. So now if I go back to my the other one, and let's bind that as well. And you used to be able to mirror joint skins, but I don't think it works anymore. So let me try it. Mirror skin weights. Well, let's see. Hey, look at that, it works. Cool, that's exactly what we wanted. As long as your joints are named the same as your geo's name, similarly, it should work without a problem. Cool. So now I can rotate both of these guys around like I want them to. The only thing is when I have the lattice turned on, come here, there we go. For these two, and I rotate them, they're gonna rotate as a post deformation after the lattice. So I just want to reverse that order. So go to inputs, all inputs. I'm going to drag this down using the middle mouse button. And the window auto-populates. So you notice as I switches between the two geometries in here. And now when I rotate this, it's going to stay inside that eye. Remember I had that same problem with the popping out. So to fix that, instead of scaling out the lattice, because I've already deformed the lattice into the shape I want, I can go to that FFD1 and under outside lattice, I'm going to set it to all. So basically it just expands its region of influence. So now it's going to stay inside. So I'll do the same thing over here on the other lattice. Change that to all. Cool. So now when I rotate them, they stay how I want. If I'm worried about the pupil not being spherical. Remember, I do have that that pupil joint, and now I can move that around. It will do some deformation just because of the nature of the lattice not being perfect, right? But that's not too bad. All right, let's keep that like that for now and finish up making the rig. So the next thing we do is go to these two guys here. And actually, I'll do this without any of my tools. So I'm going to go to Create, NURBS, Primitives, and I'll make a circle. I'm going to make it bigger and rotate this way 90 degrees. And we'll call it L, I, aim, CTL, and group it. L, I, aim, group, and duplicate it. And then on the second one, I will change the L underscore to an R underscore. And then get rid of the numbers on the end. Cool. And then I'll take the one for the left and I'm going to snap it to it. So you can actually use modify, match transformations, match all transformations. And you see how it snapped to it. I don't want that 90 on there. I'll do the same thing to the other side. Just hit Y, nope, G. Yep, there we go, G. We'll do the same thing again. Zero that out, cool. And I'm gonna take these and move them forward. That's pretty good. Group them together. I'm actually gonna center the pivot on those and I'll just show the that selection handle again so I have an easy way to grab it. And on that group, I'm going to name that group I, aim, CTL. Cool. So now I need to make these actually, whoa, did I move it? There we go. Back to where it was. So now I just need to aim these at its controllers. So you select the controller first, select the joint, and under Constrain, go to Aim. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to do reset the settings. Everything looks good. Vector world up type, we'll do scene up. I'll hit Apply. And I'll do a quick test. Cool. Do the same thing for the other one. Cool. And now I can move these together and then we'll stay together. Cool. I'm going to make a little control on there to make it more interesting. So I'm going to go to Create. Actually, let's go to Front View. I'll go to Create, Curve Tools, 2-point circular arc. I'm going to hold down C for curve snapping. Get it as flat as possible. Hit enter. Even though it's upside down, that's okay. When you're in the curve shape tool, so it's got history on it, right? Oops, doesn't it? Where's my history? Oh, did I turn history off? That's funny. I don't know when I did that. Let's do that again. Create curve tools, 2-point arc. Cool. Now I have my history still on there. You can always hit T to go back to that control. The inner little dot is for changing the arc, and the upper dot is for reversing it. Right? So we can do something like that. Looks like a little pair of glasses. And now I'm going to freeze its transformations, delete its history, and I will aim down, arrow down once to get the curve shape. Select my I aim control group, and I'm going to run parent-r-shape. And what that does is just moves the shape, the curve shape, from this transform to this transform. Again, you should probably already know that, but just so you have it. Cool. And now let's just color these things a little bit. So this is going to be my left, so blue. This will be right, so it'll be red. Actually, make it darker blue, and we'll make this one thicker. Cool. I just got a little pair of glasses. Cool. So the next thing I do is sort of package this up so that it'll work with the complete character. So what I want to do is make sure that when I move this lattice, so the lattice itself is going to move the eye around, but this is just like a whole, it's just a deformation that's going to always stay on. And notice what happens if I move the base. It has like a reversing effect. So it's the lattice versus the base that creates the movement, or deformation, I should say. So I'm going to take the base and the lattice and the left aim and group those all together. I'll call this left eye group. Actually, I'll call that rig. There we go. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. R-I rig. And then I'll take all of them, group them together, and call it I rig. Okay, now let's bring our duck head back. There he is. And you can see, now I do have a little bit of offsetting here. I'm not going to worry too much about that. That's something I can fix with, my tolerances right now are super tight on here. I'm not going to worry about that for the moment because I'm going to fix the geometry a little bit later. Okay, but just to show you how the rest of it would go, I'm going to go to the side view here. I'm going to grab my joint tool. So this is his neck. I'm going to go straight up for the head. We'll give him a beak. And we'll give him a jaw. Grab all those, parent it under the head so this all moves together, right? So I'll select these joints and just do a quick bind. Now the one thing you'll notice is when I do this, you see how the deformation on his head, he kind of collapses. That's just default weighting, nothing to worry about. So I'm going to go back in here in my paint tools. Oh, I should have named my joints, which I didn't. So neck, joint, head, joint, beak, joint, jaw, joint. Cool. Now when I go to that paint tool, I actually get names in there like it should. I'm going to grab the head and I'm going to go to add. And I'm going to add it. Actually, because I'm lazy, I'm going to go to my own little tool that I have, which is over here. Cool. So let's do this. Add that in. Add it. Want the head. I'm going to add that. Crank that up. Make it bigger. And what I do is, as I'm working, I just mirror the joints across, or mirror those weights across. Now, for another time, something you should really get into is labeling your joints. So you notice I sometimes get some things a little bit weird here. So I have a little tool here that'll just label all my joints for me. And the way that you do labeling is you want to make sure that if you have sides, well, I'm not going to get into it, but when you want to make sure you use this side attribute, because what you could do is say, left eye, right eye, but the joint, so you'd use that for the names, and then type, I never use that. I always use other and use my own names and then put that in there. But again, I'll do that another time if people need that. Okay, so now my mirror is going to work a little bit better because I just have it set to labels by default. And I didn't want to close that. Oh, I'm so rusty. There we go. Okay, put those in there. Okay, so let me unisolate this because I want to move the head around. Okay, I'm going to take that eye rig and drop it under the same grouping here. You can do a parent constraint, you can do a group, you can do a matrix constraint. It really doesn't matter. I can parent it underneath the head control if I had one. But the important thing here is I want to make sure that when I move this around, the eyes stay locked, which they do. So now you can do that and then look at the camera, right? So I am getting a little bit of weight pulling there. So again, I'm going to go back in here, add mirror, make sure that my eyes have the same weighting across. Let's just see what it looks like. Okay. Now I'll move that around again. Good, now he's locked together, and I'm not getting that penetration I was getting before. And I'll go back in and make controls for the beak and the jaw and the neck and all that other sort of stuff later. All right, so I hope that helps. Oh, also, as long as we're here, zero out the rotations. Other things you can do if you want, you can actually go in here. Actually, I'm going to freeze the scales on here. Often what I'll do is, I don't keep the scales visible. I don't keep the visibility visible, so I'm going to lock and hide those. Probably don't need the rotates either, so I'll lock and hide those. Translates, I'll keep them separate so you have two different ones. Obviously you can move it together. One of the things too, it's kind of fun. You can do like that sort of stuff, or you can scale them to get different sort of effects. The animator may want that. I'll also often put on an extra attribute here to do things like, let's put a divider on it and say dilate, except let's try and spell it right, with like a negative, well, let's just do 0 to, I don't know, 5. And add that. And I will just take that and add it to directly to my joint here or something else using like a center-driven key. So if I take the center-driven key, attribute, throw that on there, dilate, put that into the scales. So when dilates at 1, it'll look like that. When dilates at 0, we'll just take this and scale it way down. Key that. And then when dilates at 5, we'll see how far we can dilate it out. And again, I could do better weighting across there or something like that. And just make sure to make that the default value of 0 or of 1. There we go. So if I want to mirror that over to the other side, I could go through and just make sure I got my values right and things like that. Or I could just go to the node editor, and this is how I do it most of the time. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to grab this joint here and do load the inputs. So I'm not worried about the upper eye there. I'll bring the other one in. Actually, let's drag it in. So it's easier when you drag it in from the outliner. If you use the add, it tends to do some weird things. It'll redo your outliner. Okay, so what I'm going to do, this little bonus, I'm sure most of you checked out by now. Go to scale, open that up. Okay, cool. Take these guys, I'm going to duplicate them. And I usually make sure that I have them in order so they make sense. And from the dilate, now by default, I'm not seeing my inputs. I have to go up here and say, oh, why is that working? Show all. There we go. And I'm going to go from dilate into input. Show all. I could go there and edit my custom attribute list, but being lazy. And this works. Cool. Another way you could do that if you're actually not showing them, let's go back to there. Wait, didn't I cut it? Okay. If I bring this up in here and hit this extra button up here, it'll say other and give you inputs. I sometimes do that, but very rarely. Usually I just show it so I can see it. And then this is going to go into our scales of that right eye. So output, oops, come here, output, cool. And this is just one way to do this. I mean, there's a million different ways you could do this. But now I can grab these guys and change the dilation there. All right, and then the last thing I do is just to make sure to hide these lattices because nobody wants to see those. And also turn off any of those local rotation axes that we're seeing. I'll go to Geo and Curves, and now you can see my little eye controls here. All right, so I hope that helps. And just remember, it's all about the all inputs and where they are. Oh, one last thing. Sorry, I know. I got a Paint Skin Weights tool here. Oh my God, is it gonna work now? It's not working. Cool. Okay, so if you get this, so if it's a reference like mine is right now, there's a weird thing that happens. So under inputs, when I do all inputs, now that I've reversed these orders, if I right click and go to the paint menu, which is normally where you can find the paint skin weights tool, you can find it here as well. But you notice when I go to paint on this, I get a big X, right? Same thing. But I know that these joints affect this geometry. We worked on it, we just did it, but now it's gone. So you would think, oh, you know what if I reverse it and try that again? If I go to paint, nothing, paint skin weights, oh, it's there, but it's still an X. Okay, so I don't know if this is a bug or whatever, but I'll show you how to fix it. So if you need to go back in there and paint some of this stuff. So again, with deformation, let's show shapes here. And I'll bring up the node editor because I think that's helpful. Okay. Let me show some objects here. And let's bring it in. Cool. So there's a whole bunch of shapes under here. And this is what happens when you do a reference and that has a deformer already on it with history, and then you bring it in. Pre-2024, this was not a problem. I don't know why it's happening now. So if I go to my attribute editor here and I select the deformed shape, this is the one that's currently visible. If I select the other ones, you see how they don't show up in the viewport. Let me move this out of the way. Cool. They don't show up in the viewport when you select them, but they are there, right? So if I select this one, you'll notice it has sorry, my mouse went away. Intermediate shape object. Under object display, intermediate object is checked on. If I select the one that's visible, it's checked off. That's generally how you know which shape node is the one that's being presented to be rendered and visible in the screen. If I click this button, it goes away because now it's going to hide it by default. That's what intermediate, telling it it's an intermediate object, which means it's on the history chain, is going to hide it. So if I go back to this other one here, the one that's inputting, and I make that one visible, watch what happens. So now I can go down to my paint menu, and I can actually paint the cluster weights again. I can open up, and actually, just to prove it, see you can paint, right? I don't know why that is. Just be sure when you're done with that, although it probably still works. Okay, yeah, so I'm getting weirdness, right? Because that history has changed. So this is the output one that has the correct deformation history on. So I'm going to go in here and turn that back on and turn this off. And now I should, oops. There we go. Oh, have I broken it? Oh, I think I broke it. Oh, you know what? No, I forgot to put my order back together again. Remember lattice second. There we go. So now it's back to the way it was before. All right, so I hope that's been helpful. And if you have any more questions, or if you want to see me continue rigging this duck head, let me know. All right, thanks.